In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Boston Bruins, the Dallas Stars, and the San Jose Sharks. Plus, we also have some other updates concerning the Toronto Maple Leafs, Arizona Coyotes, and the St. Louis Blues. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some rumors and other news I want to discuss today. Let's get started with a couple quick news updates. First of all, starting with the Arizona Coyotes. Now, apparently the Coyotes are being investigated by the NHL for allegedly doing some fitness testing on some draft-eligible Canadian Hockey League players who play within the three junior leagues in Canada, within the WHL, the OHL, and the QMJHL. Apparently, a while back when this started to come to light, those three leagues all sent emails to all the teams, a notification indicating that they were looking for examples of this had happened, if anybody could corroborate the theory that this was going on. And they had several cases within all three leagues where they all responded saying that it was indeed happening. So now the league is investigating and is not quite sure exactly how long the investigation is going to take, but apparently the team could be fined up to $250,000 per incident, and I do believe Gary Bettman as commissioner does have to impose some other punishments as well. I'm not really sure if they could lose draft picks or what exactly the extent of it could be, but either way, this is not a good look for the Coyotes. They could be fined a significant amount of money and be punished in other ways. So I guess we'll wait for further updates as the NHL completes its investigation. It's really unclear how long this is going to take or when we'll have any further updates. The Coyotes were asked for comment, and all they would say, which is really no big surprise, is that they have discussed the situation with the NHL, were cooperating, and there'll be no further comments at this time. Now, the St. Louis Blues have signed a pair of players, mostly guys who are playing in their minor leagues, but these contracts are one-way deals for guys who could be part of their NHL roster next year, and that's goaltender Ville Husso and defenseman Nico Mikkola. Now, of course, Husso has been in the organization for a number of years. At one point was looked upon as the heir apparent or goalie of the future who could take over from Jake Allen. Of course, we know what happened with that. Jordan Binnington kind of taken that role on, obviously, after his quick rise to the NHL last year, go on to win the Stanley Cup. Now he's got a bigger contract for the next few years, but you could certainly argue Jake Allen's numbers this year are certainly just as good. And you can't help but wonder what this means for the future of goaltending with the Blues organization, with Ville Husso getting a 2-year extension with a one-way deal. Now, of course, it's only $750K, so it's not a ton of money, but it certainly would help the Blues with their cap situation moving forward if they didn't have two goaltenders making over $4 million. Binnington's contract was given as just a slight bit more than Allen, making 4.4, whereas Jake's making 4.35. So clearly very similar contracts. They both have one more year after this. So that means that Binnington and Allen would both be eligible for extensions after July 1st. You can't help but wonder what kind of deal Binnington could be looking at next. But if you look at the two goaltenders this year, I mean, Binnington's been good, but Jake Allen certainly has rebounded nicely. And even though he's played a lot fewer games than Binnington, his stats are actually a bit better. So certainly makes things very interesting here moving forward. Husso has been playing in the minor leagues for a few years now. Likely could be ready for an opportunity. And like I said, having a contract like that as the backup goalie spot could certainly go a long way to freeing up cash flow to help the team in other ways. So could they trade Jake Allen? Could there be a buyout? Difficult to say. Depends on really what happens. I guess we'll see how the playoffs go as well. You just never know what can happen. Injuries can take place, and we'll have to revisit this in the offseason. Now, another quick piece of news here on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Has been reported on NHL Insider Trading that the Maple Leafs and Jake Muzzin's representatives are expected to begin contract extension talks soon, that there is mutual interest from both sides to get a deal done for him to remain with the Leafs for at least the foreseeable future here. Of course, they acquired him from the Los Angeles Kings a while back and gave up a pretty hefty price tag to get him, so clearly they want to keep him around. He's certainly one of their better, if not their best, defensive defensemen. Can play a physical style of game. Clearly, there's a lot of question marks on the Leafs blue line moving forward with so many pending unrestricted free agents. Of course, Tyson Barrie and Cody Ceci also in that same predicament. And you have youngsters as well like Rasmus Sandin, Timothy Liljegren trying to work their way up into regular spots. I know Sandin's doing an excellent job at creating a case for him to stay right now and likely having a solid regular spot next year for sure by the looks of things. So certainly going to be probably another revamped blue line next year for the Leafs, but Muzzin would like to stay. The Leafs would like to keep him. Not quite clear what the terms are going to be, but talks should be going here soon, I think, with the hopes of possibly reaching an agreement before the deadline. Now jumping over and take a look at some trade rumors. As we reported the other day, the Boston Bruins had put David Backes through waivers. He did clear, which gave them the option of sending him to the minors, which they technically have assigned him to the minors, but he was told he didn't have to go. He could wait it out through the All-Star break. Then we had an announcement after things resumed that he did not have to report. I believe for cap purposes, he's technically still considered as assigned to the AHL. He's just not being forced to play right now. They have that agreement in place. I know I saw some comments in other videos here in the past few days indicating that Backes could be in violation of his contract and could end up being a buyout like we saw with Ilya Kovalchuk on the LA Kings previously this season, but that is not the case right now. He is not in violation of the CBA or anything with his contract because they do have an agreement in place. It's been discussed and the Bruins are okay with him not reporting. He's basically being paid to stay home right now, and actually by him going to the minors, even if he does, or if he's considered an AHLer for the time being, he'll actually get a raise because he's getting his full salary where he has a 1-year contract. Plus, they don't have the escrow deductions for players in the AHL since he's not technically in the NHL at that time. So I guess we'll see, but obviously there's been some rumblings about potential trades, where he might go, and the Bruins, if they're not making him report, then maybe they're confident they can get a deal done. And there's a couple scenarios that's been discussed through other media sources that kind of make sense. As I mentioned before, Elliot Friedman's reported that the Anaheim Ducks have made it known that they would be willing to take on a bad contract to gain other assets in exchange for some other pieces that they might be willing to part with. So it's possible that maybe the Ducks could be taking a look at doing that. I know it's been linked before. There's been other reports that the Boston Bruins are very interested in Ducks winger Andre Kasha. Of course, he's a pretty young, dynamic winger, but at the same time has battled a lot of injuries. But if they can move Backes for him, that might be a deal that might be worth having a look at. I think there's other players on the rental market that might be better suited for Boston. But like I said, if it means moving Backes, then I think that would be a wise move, depending on what else they have to give up, of course. There's also an article through The Athletic making a case that maybe their division rival, the Ottawa Senators, should help them out. They've got tons of cap space, and they very well could take advantage of the situation to help themselves here by taking on the Backes bad contract. Now, the big thing with Backes is not just this year. He's got one more year left, which is going to cause a lot of teams to shy away. But in Ottawa's case, if they did that, he could either play the remainder of the year with them or not. I'm not sure what kind of agreement they could come to. Either way, they have a couple of other bad contracts that have been sitting there for a while, coming off the books at the end of the season. Of course, Ryan Callahan, who they acquired from Tampa but never played for them, his contract will be expired. And of course, Clark MacArthur, who's been out for a significant period of time, the last few years due to concussions, is also still technically on the books. That'll be coming off as well. So they will have more room in that sense. They could take the Backes contract on to gain some other assets, and with only 1 year remaining, they could actually do a buyout in the summer, and he may not even ever have to play for the Senators. Technically, a buyout wouldn't cost all that much. It would only be $2 million over 2 years, so it'd be a low hit, and certainly not a ton of cash going out. And if they can gain some other assets that can help them with their rebuild, then perhaps that might be an actual wise move. It'd be dependent on what was offered, of course, but there is a possibility we could see the Senators help the Bruins out in that regard as well. The Sharks are in a team that's really having a disappointing season. That only continued to get worse when they get the bad news that forward Thomas Hertl is done for the year after having a torn ACL, MCL injury. The bad luck only continues to get worse. Of course, Logan Couture is already out. Everything else is not going well for the Sharks. They've got a lot of big-time contracts tied up, especially on their blue line between Karlsson, Vlasic, Brent Burns. With the money they've got invested there, they're just not getting the results. Goaltending's been an issue for some time for San Jose. I really think they're really missing former captain Joe Pavelski. I think that took a much bigger blow to the team, bigger hit than Doug Wilson or any of the other players really imagined it would. Certainly really messed, I think, with the overall team chemistry. But the Sharks are in a situation where they're definitely going to be sellers. I don't see any way how they can kind of climb themselves out of this. Like I said, with all the problems they already have, Couture's out, now Hertl's done for the year. To make things worse, they're in the same predicament we saw with the Senators a few years back. They don't have their first round pick. That belongs to Ottawa, which is certainly going to make them happy seeing the Sharks fall further in the standings. They could have 2 first round picks in the top 10, maybe even top 5, depending on how those lottery balls go and what kind of luck they have on draft lottery night here coming up in a couple months' time. But I guess we'll see what happens with San Jose. But the problem is, too, is they don't have a ton of assets they can sell. I mean, there's Brendan Dillon seems to be getting a lot of interest from around various NHL teams, a complete physical defenseman. Shouldn't have too large of a price tag. They could move Joe Thornton to go chase a Stanley Cup, but really overall, there's a lot of other guys that are tied up long term on big money deals, like the 3 defensemen I mentioned. You've got Couture, Evander Kane, Hurdle, Timo Meier. Like, there's just not a lot of assets that they're going to want to move, so it's not like they can really acquire a whole lot to go towards next year, but we'll see if they can bounce back and what moves Doug Wilson can make during the offseason. But certainly a really bad time for them to be so low in the standings and not have their first round pick. And of course, as I mentioned here as well, Dallas Stars are another team we want to take a look at. Of course, they're looking to add some additional scoring ahead of the NHL Trade Deadline. Certainly lots of players that might make sense for them to look at. The only problem is the price tag might be too high in many of those cases. If you look at like Chris Kreider, Tyler Toffoli, for example, the top 2 rental wingers on the market, not really sure they're going to have a lot of assets that they're going to want to give up and that it would be attractive to those other teams to make that type of acquisition. They already don't have a second and third round pick in the draft this year, so giving up their first in a very deep draft might be a big mistake long term, so that's not good. Of course, they have some prospects that are good, but it's not one of the deeper pools around the NHL. They certainly have a few guys that I can't imagine they'd want to trade, including guys like Ty Dellandrea, Jason Robertson, Thomas Harley. I just don't see them being assets they're going to want to move. And as much as they might have some attractiveness to other teams, like they're good prospects, they're just not really high-end prospects that I don't think are going to garner a ton of attention, and they need to hang on to what they have. If they move many of those players, they're really going to leave themselves short for the future. And they're already short on picks this year, just not really a great scenario. So that means they'd have to take something off their roster. So they might be stuck going after a lower price tag. Might be stuck trying to acquire some other players that's going to cost significantly less. And I can't help but wonder if they could look to the Montreal Canadiens to bring in another Russian winger in Ilya Kovalchuk, who has certainly had a nice rebound, bounce back type of season since he's joined Montreal. We saw another Russian player who now plays for Dallas, Alexander Radulov, leave the Habs and go to the Stars. And they've had a lot of success with Radulov, so could they possibly pull off another situation where they bring in another Russian winger from the Montreal Canadiens? Of course, they signed Radulov as a free agent, but the asking price for Kovalchuk, I can't imagine would be too crazy high, but that would be more realistic, I think, for them to acquire. Many teams around the league had interest before the Kings signed him, and certainly a lot of that interest went away after he struggled, and I do think a lot of the interest is going to start to come back here ahead of the deadline now that he's bounced back and has played extremely well with Montreal since he landed there. So that is all your news updates for today. Of course, as always, I want to know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section. Let me know what your thoughts are, especially on these trade rumors, and we'll discuss further in the comments. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.